Alright, so it's time to talk about Vauban. So this is going to be two builds, like I guess usual now. Most frames have two pretty viable builds. The first of which is the most recent build that I threw together because it's a build that I knew about but I had not like really used. I knew that it was effective, but I'd mostly just seen it as opposed to actually used it. The first build is the Repelling Vauban build, which utilizes Repelling Bastille, which is a syndicate mod, to essentially let you Bastille everything so that no one can move, which is really useful. And it's also the build that I used in the regular and Nightmare raid for my first completion videos, which just recently went up. So that is the build that I used for that. It worked really, really well, actually. Even though Vauban is not a frame that I usually prefer to be, I think he's a good frame, certainly. Like his abilities are not to be understated, but he's not my preferred choice. But his builds are, and rather his powers are really good, and they're just fun to use whenever whenever the chance arises, I guess. Like, I don't mind it. So, let's just get right to the build. This is the Repelling Bastille build that I use, or that I did use for the raid. Basically, the gist of this is that you have max efficiency, and you have a hilariously large range. So you can just hit 3 and just keep hitting 3 and just throw Bastilles all over the place, and no one can move whatsoever. And the reason that this works is because of Repelling Bastille. This basically makes it so that enemies can't. Bastille is for keeping enemies in the air, but also away from things. So whenever you use Repelling Bastille, it means even if your Bastille is full of enemies, it still will keep enemies out, which is really, really useful, as you might imagine. So that's why you use this mod. And then other than that, this build is pretty simple. The really good thing about this build in terms of its actual viability is that it has quick thinking and flow in it, which actually, I think I should move some of these around. There we go. Yeah, quick thinking and flow. These are your survivability. Obviously, because prime flow does exist, if you have and want to use that is an obvious upgrade to this build that I don't think is particularly necessary. Also, this is a zero forma build, so keep that in mind for those of you that like to use forma to get the most out of your frames. Also, if you are looking to forma and use this build, I would suggest a D polarity for quick thinking, because quick thinking is just generally very good on Vauban, and then you can slot in pretty much. Yeah, I think you only have enough points for mobilize actually, but mobilize is a good mod that would fit in there if you forma just once, and that's pretty good. Or you can wait for prime Vauban, which is maybe not terribly far away, but basically overextended, stretch, super huge range, and then fleeting at 10, stream at 8. So you don't lose as much duration, because having a decent amount of duration is good for your Bastilles actually lasting any significant amount of time. It just being at 100% means that each Bastille lasts 15 seconds, which is pretty good. But generally, this is going to be for just tossing 3s everywhere. And then you can pretty much just take whatever weapons you want, because you're just crowd controlling super hard for this build, and that's basically what it does. If you guys want to see that stuff, obviously my raid videos are up and available for you to go check out. There's plenty of gameplay there of me just going ham with the Bastilles. But let's talk about Vortex Vauban, who is, I feel, recently a little underused. Although it has to go into Vauban being completely random generally to acquire from alerts, and he's just underused because of that, I think, and that he doesn't have any super direct damage. So in lower level stuff, he's not really required as much. But let's take a look at, and one more thing I meant to mention. Because he has the dash polarity up here, Corrosive and Energy Siphon are interchangeable depending on the difficulty of the mission that you're doing. So that is to be kept in mind. Does not require Corrosive Projection. Energy Siphon is what I would usually use for things that are like mid to low level. It's only in the high level where you want Corrosive Projection. So, this is Vortex Vauban, or at least what I use whenever I am vortexing things. This build benefits more from Forma. So if you're going to Forma and you threw in a D, actually the same, another D polarity, you'd be able to throw in like Flow on this build for that more defensiveness from quick thinking. But basically the general thing with this build is that you want as much duration as possible while not having terrible range, which is why you have the stretch, to kind of counteract the narrow-minded a little bit. But generally for this build, it is for choke pointing enemies where you have a lot of duration, and it is just like throwing vortexes to keep things in check. Generally for like heavy crowd control on infested, or on doors that you can't have enemies coming through. Heavy crowd control, very useful against infested specifically. Now the thing about this build, also it's worth mentioning that if you were to Forma and do quick thinking, the other augment for Vauban that makes it so you can throw vortexes together and add their duration together is really good for this build, but would kind of change it in a lot of ways. This is kind of more of a basic vortex build. Also, Bastille is still good in this build, and your 1 is fine in this build. 2 is Vauban's 2 sucks, but basically this is just like for choke pointing enemies super hard, usually against infested, and you're just throwing 4, and your 4 is a harder crowd control than Bastille is because it sucks enemies in and ragdolls them. So it's whenever you need to like group enemies up and like get them and just eliminate all of them. Now weapons that are good for that are obviously weapons with AoE, like the Ogress. This weapon, you just blow everyone up that's in your vortex, and that's basically how that'll go. You know, it's really weird because there's not a lot to say about Vauban because his builds are really straightforward and simple. So unfortunately, I don't really feel like there's that much to explain other than this is the build for his Vortex, and this is the build for his Bastille. I would say that this one is probably the more useful of the two. And if you were to want to kind of get a middle ground of both of these, I would say you could probably drop Flow and add in narrow-minded, and I think that change would be, that change is like reasonable. It depends on how like comfortable you are with how much energy you have and how much you need like quick thinking to save you. But yeah, like dropping Flow for narrow-minded would be fine. It would require a Forma, but I don't think that's that big a deal. And like there are a couple other changes you can make here and there to kind of tweak it to the way that you prefer it. But generally, both builds are really, really good. And yeah, they are quite useful. Yeah.